So without further ado, I think we still have plenty of people to join, but we're gonna get started for those of you who were kind enough to join on time. And the first thing we're gonna do is this, what are we doing? So the way this is gonna work is we're gonna do a little introduction. We're gonna have 3 questions. We're gonna have each of the panelists answer those questions. And some of them will be more dominant than others in their field of expertise, but we definitely want all of the panelists to also pitch in and really to have a conversation. And then in the meantime, you have a Q&A button right here on the bottom. You can start submitting your questions and we'll allocate a specific amount of time at the end to have a conversation with you and to answer your questions, okay? So that's the way it's gonna work. Thank you again for being here. As you know, the big topic here is how to prepare for the unexpected. And the rationale is that we've been here for 4, 5, 6 weeks. And what's next and how can we be better prepared? So without further ado, I'm gonna get started presenting our dear panelists. And I'm gonna start with Dr. Mark McHale, who I've had the honor of knowing and really serving with since 2011, I think it was. We both, he's the head of, he's the chief medic of Maccabi USA, which is a sports organization that really has a lot of different activities. And we've been very involved in the international games, including the Pan American Games, the European Games, and of course the World Cup in Israel every 4 years, being actually the 4th or the 3rd largest sporting events in the world. So Mark, it's a pleasure to have you here. I know you can talk about a lot of different things, and I love the last of your slides that you submitted. An all-around great guy, that's definitely you. So thank you so much for being here. And I'm sure you're gonna have very good tips for everyone regarding their health. Orly, thank you so much for being here as well. We've also met a long time ago, believe it or not. I met Orly doing Pilates at 6 a.m. with this South African teacher, lady who was like a sergeant, was like a drill sergeant, and got us up and running very early in the morning. And Orly's been in this field of helping on the mental side of things, families and kids and couples. So thank you so much for being here, Orly. We all know that also being stuck in the same place with our loved ones brings out a lot of different frictions, and I'm sure you're going to give a lot of good tips on how to deal with that and move forward. Chris Story, pleasure to have you here. I could have put like 20 more bullet points, but I think these were impressive enough. Former US Army counterintelligence agent, Ranger. I've met Chris in the process of something called the IPSB, which is basically the Executive Protection Board or the top Executive Protection Association organization here in the US. We've met at a couple of those conferences, and having been in the realm of uncertainty, like Clausewitz said, and you'll see that in a minute, which is the battlefield. I'm sure you're going to bring some very interesting ways and tactics to perform under stress and see through this whole situation. So thank you so much for being here. Jen, fantastic to have you here as well. I met Jen as a professor. She was in the process of the executive MBA at FIU a few years ago. Jen was one of the teachers, and we had a lot of fun in her classes, and she was absolutely great when it comes to understanding the whole HR piece. And of course, that's something that is in our minds, in the minds of many right now, right? What is work going to be like? What's going to happen? Am I going to be able to go back to my job? How is that going to look like? And what can I do today to be in a better position for tomorrow? So I'm sure that Jen's going to come up with some really good solutions for that and advice. And then Martine is also a very long friend. Met him, I think we did an Israeli martial arts course that I used to teach in the academy. Basically, Martine did one of the courses, and we've been in touch ever since. We did some training in Colombia together for the U.S. Navy, the equivalent of the SEALs of Colombia, and we've met in different locations. And Martine is really a guy who can understand cybersecurity and get some very practical tools. And so cybersecurity is also a field where we need to be prepared. Everyone's reading the news and you see what's happening. It's not only the financial institutions. Today it's our kids, it's our work. So I'm sure that Martine is going to bring a lot of good advice in that realm. The other field that I wanted to include in this presentation, which is obviously something that is concerning for many, is our personal finances. But that is a completely separate webinar that we're going to have very soon, hopefully. And but of course, that's something that we also have to take care of. Okay, so guys, thank you so much for being here, and a real pleasure. Looking forward to this. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Joe Gare. Been in the field of security / protection / intelligence for about 25 years, and I spent about 10 years in Israel, working there in security in different capacities with the government. And I'm now in Miami. I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm also a father and a husband. And so I understand what's going on today in people's minds, and how can we bring part of our experience and help you guys with that. That's really the story. So why are we doing this? And that's what I was just talking about, is really we want to be part of the solution, right? So we want to help you spread positivism, leadership, courage, togetherness, right? And not the fear and the panic that we're getting fed through the media. And it doesn't matter if you're watching CNN, Fox News, or whatever channel you're watching, it's all negative news. It's all very stressing. And then of course we have those WhatsApp messages that we all have to send right now to all of our friends and family, and we have good intentions, but the accumulation of that just creates an enormous amount of stress. Okay, so the idea here is, again, to take, at least in my experience, take from what we call the warrior mindset, which is something that we've developed with our experience and through training, and how can we share that with you to make, really, at the end of the day, our community stronger. So I'm going to start with this. The real problem today is really the uncertainty, right? And nobody understood more about uncertainty than this guy called General Karl von Clausewitz. I studied him when I was studying international relations many, many years ago. And he talked a lot about the battlefield and really the realm of uncertainty and how do you cope with that. Why having a plan is great and it's something you should have, but why you should be flexible and adapt to it. Why, when you think that communication is clear, you may end up with no communication, and then what do we do? Right? Maybe one of the scenarios that maybe Chris and Martine can touch upon, right? What happens if, some people have asked me these questions by email, and some friends have asked, what happens if the internet falls? What happens if, there's a blackout? All these scenarios are real, and we should have a plan so we can be a little bit more, at least understand that we're doing whatever we can do to be better prepared. Again, talking about preparedness, and for those of you who know me, you know that I have I've read a lot of books on the samurai. I've studied a lot of this through one of my mentors and dear friends, James Williams. And really what I wanted to bring here is the whole piece about awareness that the samurai talked about. So knowing yourself, your weapons, your environment, and your enemies is essential if you want to be victorious. And what he said is that preparation is key for all of this. Actually, he talked about winning first in the mind, which is something also we'll talk about in a minute. But the samurai, if you think of it, are, in their world, seconds and time and distance were vectors that are at different levels than what we can imagine today, right? So for them, not being present in that moment meant that their head was going to be chopped off in a fraction of a second. So, and samurai, by the way, for those of you who don't know, means really the defender, the protector. And it comes from a Japanese word that means to serve. Okay, so talking about the samurai is nice, but of course today we also have our modern samurais, right, which are our soldiers, both in my two nations, the US, Israel. And then quick thought here, because now some of these Netflix series are very popular. So we have the regular warriors that we recognize, but then there's a lot of what we call secret warriors, and the preparation that goes into their type of operations is different. It's very thorough, but at the same time, you have to be flexible. You have to keep that operational focus under stress, especially if you're in the middle of a hostile city and you're undercover. You have to really focus, and these are some concepts that we'll talk about in a minute, to focus on micro tasks as a way to not freeze, or in military verbatim, get off the X, right? So instead of being frozen because of the situation, what can I do right now? There's a micro task that I can achieve right now, right here, get it done. And then a lot of these micro tasks at the end of the day give me some achievement. Okay, communication, something critical. Again, I've heard many experts saying, and we'll hear a lot from our experts today, that in these days, it's critical to communicate even excessively, right? Because everyone has things inside, and the more you can communicate, the less problems we're gonna have. And at the end of the day, I had in mind to have another slide about this, but I'm gonna say it like this. So one of the roles that I had was an instructor, a platoon commander in the officer school in Israel, in the IDF. And we used to have a saying there. We used to show the fingers like this, and you point at someone, you say, "Why did you not do this?" Or the kids didn't wake up on time. Why? And you come with a complaint to someone or to your employer. How come I? So you're pointing one finger at them. You're pointing three fingers at yourself. So accountability here, what I wanted to share with you is these are really times to be, to look at ourselves first and be responsible, and really require from ourselves to do the maximum that we can to make the situation better. There's one quick concept that I wanted to share with you, and then I'll pass the microphone to our panelists. Again, coming from the samurai, there's something very important called Mizo no Kokoro. And Mizo no Kokoro basically means mind like still water. And the concept here is very simple. No emotions, no anger, no fear, no revenge, none of these emotions. When we have this in our mind, it clouds our thinking. And when our mind is clouded, we can't really see the problem. And if we can't see the problem, we can't really see the solution that a lot of times it is inherent in the problem. Okay, so again, this comes back from the samurai. They practiced hours and hours and hours a day on this concept, because when the other samurai or warrior came with a sword, they had to really clear their minds, have that mind like water, like still water, to understand the vectors, understand the situation, get out of the way, and get out of that battle victorious. Okay, and in those times where victory or not meant life or death, basically. I know you didn't have all those swords clashing. It was a matter of seconds, and that was it. Okay, so how can I achieve this Mizo no Kokoro? And these are just a few pointers that will I'm sure, develop in a few minutes. Awareness, discipline, growth mindset, routine. Okay, how do you start your day? Are you getting this and looking for all these last messages that you got, or do you have a routine where you have a little bit of a quiet time, perhaps a breathing practice, some meditation, movement, exercise? Okay, all this is very important so that you set your day and you set your mindset on the right framework and the right frame, so you can start with positivity and do what you have to do. Okay, and then we can also incorporate systems that, when something happens, can bring you right back to your zen. Okay, and then of course exercise, sleep, and then practice. Okay, and the last thing was this. Remember those days when we used to travel? Remember, we never paid attention to these instructions. So I'm sure some of you remember that one of the first things they said there was, if there's an emergency and these things drop, the gas mask drop, put it on yourself first before you help your kids, okay? So in this situation, we have exactly the same, or you have, it's an analogy, right? You cannot help others if you don't start with yourself. So help yourself, okay? Once you do everything we just talked about and everything we'll hear about in a minute, you're going to be part of the solution, okay? And remember that leadership and courage are contagious. So let's do this, and we'll get through this, I'm sure, sooner than later, okay? And we'll have a lot of golden nuggets, and we have a lot of lessons learned that will make us come out of this stronger and better. All right, guys. So we're going to jump right into the first question. And the first question is the following. So we talked about, again, we've been here in different types of quarantines, lockdowns, however you want to call it, for on and off 4, 5, some countries even 6 weeks. Okay, we were brought into this situation in a gradual way. It started with some limitations, and now we have, in some places, for example, in Israel, a lot of limitations on you. And so routine, as we all know, we can keep discipline and routine for so long. And then the question is, what comes next? Okay, how can we prepare ourselves physically, mentally for the next stages? Both, you know, from the medical point of view, Doc, hopefully we'll share some good practices for what I will call, you know, the friction part, or the I'm getting bored of this part of this situation where it's very easy to drop guard and then stop doing dangerous things. And how do we make sure that we don't do that with our health, with our physical health, and with our mental health? Okay, so I'm going to throw it out to Dr. Mark McHale. The microphone is all yours, sir.
Thank you, Joe. And I'm going to basically follow up with a lot of things that you were referring to. So I definitely agree that in the first several weeks, we were, during the pandemic, we were just kind of figuring things out, figuring ways to cope. Many of us developed new routines, new ways going through the day, and we passed the month. And some were good, some were bad. But now we got to think longer term. We got to think, how do we keep focused on the goal, as you say? So from a medical point of view, that means doing things that will keep us safe and healthy. So both physically and mentally. Most importantly, if we do get sick, we have to have our bodies and our minds in a position that we're most successful to fight off an illness and recover. So if you haven't been doing so, you have to develop healthy habits, healthy routines. It's been a very unstructured time, and you actually have to create structure at this point in time. Maintaining daily schedules and routines are really important. So things like, you know, when you get up, what you normally do if you went to work at a certain time, that you do things and meals, try to maintain these times and keep focused on that, because that's going to, again, help you healthy. Because there's a lot of studies that show there's a lot of things that we can do that in our control that affect our immune system. And there's things that can weaken our immune system. So I'm going to just run through a few of those things, and then I'll pass the microphone back to you, Joe. So sure. 5 or 6 examples. One, as you mentioned, good constant sleep. That doesn't mean lying on the couch and taking a nap because you have free time. It means at night having a good night's sleep is so important and helps build up your immunity. The second is moderate, regular exercise. So believe it or not, no exercise, well, I know you know no exercise, but also excessive exercise can both weaken the immunity, whereas moderate exercise, getting out for either walk or run or a bike ride, something for about an hour or so once a day is very, very helpful. Meditation, obviously for the mind, when you need some type of daily meaningful way to relax your mind, to decrease the anxiety and stress that you have, there's a lot of really good apps that are available that I would encourage you to start using. I mean, we're not commuting back and forth to work, most of us now, so you have time to do some of these other things. The fourth thing would be nutrition. So proper nutrition, it starts with what you eat. Obviously, the things that are fresh, if you can get fruits, vegetables, if not frozen, vitamins and supplements, things like A, D, C, E, as well as zinc. also improve your immune system. And then you want to moderate on any kind of junk food. You can't, as my grandfather used to say, anything in moderation. So if you're gonna have ice cream, you have a little bit. And we're not saying you have to have perfect habits, but try to make as best you can. Back to another thing that you mentioned, Joe, is decreasing electronics. You know, turn off the TV, laptop, iPads, all those kinds of things for a significant portion of the day. They become distracted, waste a lot of time, and can actually be a little bit depressing. So turning those things down, not completely off, is very, very important. And then finally, and I think one of the most important things is we've been using this term, everybody's been using the term social distancing. I hate that term. I don't agree with the term. It sounds scary. It sounds depressing. We should be socially embracing. I'll talk about that in a second, while being physically distant. We have to be 4 feet, 6 feet apart. So physically distant, but that doesn't mean socially distant. So getting on FaceTime or any kind of media like this, calling your friends, people who can't get out of their home, having interaction socially is so important for your mental health as well as your physical health. So I want you to keep doing that. Don't be socially distant, be physically distant, but socially embracive.
Fantastic. One quick follow-up on that. You mentioned vitamins, and one of the things that I noticed that I talked with some of you about is that it's been interesting to see how some things are lacking in the supermarkets as we move along, right? It started with toilet paper, then eggs, then as people started working, cameras, now trimmers, right? So vitamins have definitely been out of the shelves for quite some time, Mark. So for people who can't get, their supplements and their vitamins, what type of foods can they take to get those?
I think the best source of vitamins are going to be fresh vegetables. Other places you can try besides the stores, Amazon is a great source, and keep at it, because just because they're out of it today doesn't mean they will be tomorrow. And places are starting to restock and replenish. So whether it's in the drugstores, in the food stores, or online, things should become more accessible as the hoarders disappear and you become able to get things.
Okay, fantastic. Orly, what can we do to keep our mental health in line, to keep our family members happy, etc.?
Sure. So I'm going to repeat a few things that were already said, Joe, but first of all, before I give some tools on what to do, it's important. I think it's important to talk about what we're feeling right now, what we're experiencing. So far, everybody has been on a roller coaster of emotions, from anxiety and fear to depression and anger and exhaustion and a sense of sadness and helplessness. And what I'm seeing in the past few weeks, because this is lasting longer than we imagined, is this sense of prolonged uncertainty. There's no cap to this ending. We're not seeing the end of it. And many of us are also experiencing these feelings of loss, of grief, loss of boundaries. We're doing everything from home, working and doing housework and taking care of the kids and cooking. And so there are no boundaries, loss of day and night and weekends and weekdays. Loss of, we don't know when we're going to see our loved ones, our friends and our parents and our hairdresser. And when are we going to go to the mall again? When are we going to get a cup of coffee that we love so much? So there's a lot of, these little things and big things. It's ambiguous loss that, we're experiencing this sense of grieving, that thinking about the fact that our life is probably not going to be the same. So what do we do about it? From many studies, we know that people who do best in these situations are those who don't try to control everything, who are accepting the fact that we don't have control of what's going on with this virus, accepting that things are not the way we would like. So acceptance of the situation, of the fact that we don't have control, as ridiculous as it sounds, is extremely important. That we don't have to have the same strict routine that we are used to. And I'll talk about routine in a second because I still think it's very important, but acceptance is key. The second important thing is to self-regulate our emotions. It's very important to talk about, Joe, and you mentioned that, to act before we understand what to do, we need to understand how we feel. And this is something that we have to model to our kids as well. We need to speak about how we feel, because if we don't speak about how we feel, we don't know how we feel. So it's okay. We need to validate it for ourselves and for our family and friends, that we feel the way we feel. We are supposed to feel stressed out right now because this is a stressful situation. So self-regulation is key. Talking about it, communicating. There's not too much communication right now. Communicating at the dinner table, communicating with our spouses, our friends is very important. And you know, we have a choice either to be on a survival mode or to thrive. Survive or thrive. We want to thrive. We want to make it a collective resilience, you know, to have a post-traumatic growth out of this experience, you know, I think the best and most important thing is to make a meaning out of this experience. What does it mean to you? If you are familiar with the book Men's Search for a Meaning by Viktor Frankl, who was in the concentration camp, he was, you know, he lacked control in every aspect in his life, from, you know, his freedom, his meals, everything, his humanity. And he was able, and his book is so famous because he was able to make a meaning out of his experience. So waking up in the morning and having a purpose is key, you know, and that goes back to routine. Put Zoom meetings, webinars on your calendar. Even if they're not that interesting to you, having something to do throughout the day is important. You know, plan your day. Go every night and say, how would I like to see my day tomorrow? How would I like to live my day tomorrow? What would I like to do? Create a schedule. It doesn't have to be a strict schedule. Whatever works for you, but at least to have something to do, a few things to do. Create projects that you've never been able to do before, or you never had time to do. Create those precious moments with your family that usually you are on the run. Now we have an opportunity to sit down and speak to your kids and to your husbands and wives and friends and family. And remember, as human beings, we don't thrive very well when we feel isolated. So with the circumstances right now, we can't do too many face-to-face interactions, but don't let the situation, don't get too comfortable with this situation. Stay in contact with your friends. Do FaceTime phone calls. Join book clubs or movie clubs, or you know, if you want to exercise, if you wake up in the morning and you tell yourself, I'm going to exercise today, and you find yourself not doing it at the end of the day, you got to find a way to be held accountable, because that usually works very well for people when they're held accountable find a partner to exercise with, you know, even if it's on Zoom or whatever it is, make it work. But those are some tools that I think are extremely important. Joe?
Fantastic. I don't know if some of the other panelists have some questions or comments. I have one small question for you regarding kids. You mentioned about being, you know, attentive and being aware of their well-being, their feelings. Do you recommend not only do you recommend talking to them as a group, or also how often do you recommend talking to the kids in a group, individually? How do we assess their well-being right now in this situation?
Well, you know, the most basic thing is sit down at dinner with them. This is something that I recommend not just during these tough times, but I always tell parents when I see them, do you sit down for dinner together? And you would be surprised how many families don't find the time to have dinner together throughout the week because they run from one place to another and are so busy. This is the time, sit down, talk about their days. How was your virtual school today? What do you think about this situation? How do you feel about not going back to school? You know, they may say, I couldn't care less, but you know that this is a huge disruption to their lives. So, you know, another way to encourage kids to talk about their feelings, because they don't always feel comfortable, is talk about your own feelings with them. You know, this is pretty stressful. You know, we don't see an end to it. What can we do together to make it better? You know, so you mirror, you know, you have to mirror, to be your kid's mirror and to talk about your feelings, to give them a permission to talk about their feelings.
Okay. Guys, any other questions or comments? Jen, I know you want to say something. Unmute you.
Well, I don't want to be a troublemaker, right? But I would love to. The doctor said, Mark said, have routines and stick to your routines. And Orly, the psychiatrist, said, but you know, psychotherapist. Sorry, yeah, psychotherapist. I apologize. Yeah, said, you know, like let go of your routines. It's okay. Don't, you know, like be okay with non-structure. So. Like I know that the answer is both, right? But I would love to hear you guys kind of talk about like how do we balance the, you know, we need to hold on to some things, but we also need to be okay with letting go of others.
So I'll give you a little answer. So this is what we call, Orly and I are in violent agreement. Okay, so we're taking from different approaches, but really when I'm not saying structure like we're in the Army. I'm saying there's no structure in our day right now. You have to create some. Orly's saying you have to put something on your schedule. That's structure. She's saying not to force it and not to be so rigid. So we really are in agreement. We're saying we're coming at it from opposite ends. But I don't think we are in disagreement. You want to have some structure as far as when you sleep, when you get up, having the meal with your family is so important. Finding some time to exercise, finding some things that you put on your schedule or activities, finding some time when you FaceTime, whether you call your parents or your friends. So those are, I consider that structure as opposed to wasting the day away. So before this, in the good old days, 2 months ago, Saturday or the weekend would come and we'd spend the day, lay on the couch, we watch TV. Those are unstructured days. I'm saying that's not what we should be doing. But again, not rigid like an Army program. So Orly, you can comment on what I just said.
And I completely agree. I don't disagree with you. I think I'm the biggest believer in structure. I do very well with structure myself. I think that we don't need to be so hard on ourselves either. You know, just let go a little bit of that need to control everything and accept that you don't have control over some situations, but you do have control of how you construct your day and your weeks, the coming weeks.
Fantastic. So I'm going to take this here and segue with the following. I've had a few Zoom meetings where I've seen my counterparts. They look like missing in action, prisoner of war. They haven't shaven, and I don't know, their heads are like this. And I've joked with some of the guys that I've held meetings with. I've said, listen, do me a favor for the Zoom meeting, put some deodorant, and comb your hair. So, so talking about our all these meetings that we're having, et cetera, I think it's a good way to go into the next question, which is actually work related, right? And it is basically, and Jen, this one, you'll start with it, but again, we can all pitch in and say how this situation has affected your line of work and where do you think it's going and what can we do now to really get a better chance of being successful in the future, right? There may be an opportunity here.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, I think a lot about this, it's interesting because my area of research as I'm working on my doctorate is to look at career transition. And while I've looked very specifically at the career transition from military service to civilian career, a lot of my research is very applicable now, just in terms of, we're all in a bit of a transition. And, the way we were working, as, Mark said, in the good old days, two months ago, the way we were all working is different than the way we're working now. And so there's a transition for us in a getting used to that change. And I think, really thinking about, embracing that change and looking for what's good about it. And so, maybe you were a little bit bored with how things were. Maybe you were, a little bit just kind of going through the motions in your job, right? You're getting up, you were going, you knew what was expected of you, you did those things. And I'm suggesting now's a really good time to think about, in what way would you want to reinvent yourself if you had the opportunity to do that? You might be in a situation where you're furloughed or laid off and you have no choice but to think about what's going to be next. Maybe you're fortunate enough that your job hasn't yet been affected or isn't going to be markedly affected, other than the fact that just your work environment has changed and you're working from home, and at some point you may go back to a more structured environment. In any case, what I would say is, in this time that you have, and in agreeing with what was said already in terms of creating some structure for yourself, right? Scheduling time for yourself to just sit down and think through the things that you value, right? The things that when you catch yourself being driven by the pace of all that it is your life, the work and managing. Work is so busy, home life is so busy, your children's sports schedules are so busy, and you never really have time to stop and just say to yourself, do I really love what I'm doing? Is it really aligned with my values? Right? And so really thinking about what does that even mean? What are your values? And I can tell you, if you just go on to any of the search engines, Google, Bing, Netscape, any of them, and look for values sort. There are some really cool activities out there that you can do that just ask yourself, okay, like if this is a list of values, how do I rank them? How do I come up with my top 5, my top 10? Am I able to live out my values in the career that I have today and in the work that I'm doing today? And if not, as I'm forced into this change potentially, right? How can I make sure that what I do next is really going to be aligned with those values? And so I think just, staying really open-minded to those things. And then I would say, just for anybody, I can't encourage you enough to just really think like an intrapreneur or an entrepreneur if you want to start your own thing. But what an intrapreneur? What do I even mean by that, right? So like, are you independent-minded, self-motivated, proactive, right? Are you willing to change jobs in your current company or change jobs to a different company, as everything's changing around you, are you able to have that self-motivation and that thought around, okay, how can I make this change work for me? What am I good at? What do I enjoy doing? And how can I really make this a very positive situation?
It's kind of like the book we had in class back in those days. I think it was called What Got You Here Won't Get You There, right?
What got you here won't get you there. That's right. Yeah, you got to be ready to change. I mean, you might have been the absolute best at something up until this point, and now things are changing around you, and you can still absolutely be successful. You may not have to stay committed to like that exact same career, that exact same work. Now just may be exactly the time to find something that gets you really excited. And I always say, like, I still don't know what I want to do when I grow up, and so maybe I'll decide what I want to do when I grow up.
Good time to think about it and then put it to action, right? Make a plan.
Yes.
Start getting your materials, whatever they are, LinkedIn, or get your contacts in those lines of work that you want to get involved in, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I mean, certainly,
Your
LinkedIn,
bio,
that's
your resume.
right. Yeah. Get your resume updated, again, like when you're looking for things to do to keep yourself focused. I liked what you said earlier about, micro tasks, right? So if you are having a bad day and you're having a hard time getting yourself motivated away from binge watching Netflix, right? What is something that you can do today that is preparing you for this change, right? Make sure that your resume is up to date. Spend a little bit of time on your LinkedIn profile and how does it look to you? If you were a recruiter looking at your LinkedIn profile, would there be anything there that would make you say, wow, this is somebody that I want to talk to? Those are things that, you only have to spend a half hour, an hour on them at a time. It's not that you have to sit and pore over them for hours, but just using that to like schedule those things, that structure to say, okay, I'm going to do something today that prepares me for what might be next.
Fantastic. So I'm going to take this and we're going to go into, just to get a little bit ahead of ourselves, to the third question. And we're going to come back to work because it's also related to online and to some of the problems and opportunities that we'll see there in the cyber realm. But one thing before we go into the third one is I wanted to remind you guys that you can submit your questions using the Q&A button. So please do that now. And question number 3, not number 2, relates to our physical security and the cybersecurity realms. Okay, what are the concerns here? And Chris and Martine, you can take turns on this. Maybe we'll start with the physical side of things, and then we'll jump to the cyber thing, to the cyber realm. Okay, so how do I prepare myself? Chris, what areas should we even start to consider about? There's a lot of talk about, excuse my French, when the shit hits the fan, we may see, looting. And how are you assessing the situation right now, and how can we prepare physically, our homes, our families, etc.? And I have this here for you if you want me to run the slides.
Sure, that sounds great. I mean, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we can, that we're being prepared. Right, are you there? Oh, there we go. Cool. Being prepared for the unknown, right? From a physical security perspective. Obviously, we all have things that can impact us differently, and we come from different walks of life and different situations. And before we get too far into this, it's interesting if you take what Dr. McHale said, what Jen said, and what Orly said, all of these things will actually apply to your job situation, your physical situation, your mental situation, and your mental well-being. So we all have our own risk profiles that can what can negatively impact us, right? What negatively affects us. And right now, since everything's all doom and gloom all the time, kind of put us on the couch eating bonbons, for quite a time. But at some point we have to get up and make a decision, and maybe one of the positive things that comes out of this is that we don't wear pants anymore. I don't know. But as we take a look at this, we try to figure out how the COVID crisis and all that it brings, does it increase our risk or does And for most of us, it increases it. So how do we prepare for that? How do we take control of what is going on around us, right? I mean, just like Orly was saying, like there's a big sense of loss of control. So that can have a big impact on our confidence. The one thing that COVID has done is it's put the whole world on pause and allows us to kind of gain some momentum through this in a positive way. To be honest with you, some folks have told me, look, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to have time to have a job after this. I'm just getting so much done, you know, and that kind of is what Jeff's talking about. Now, the negative, the supply chain has been impacted. If you toilet paper, I say use all those single socks that are floating around, but the supply chain, income has been impacted. A lot of uncertainty. And then of course, if you watch the media news, it's all doom and gloom all the time. So we want to be able to gain some level of control and confidence out of this. But the positive piece is we can get through it. And if we do a little planning and preparation, that planning and preparation will bring us confidence and control. From a personal perspective, you know, Joe talked about the shit hitting the fan. A lot of folks didn't really recognize that this pandemic, that down the world was shit hitting the fan. It just didn't manifest in ways that everybody thought it would, like global war, nuclear warfare, whatever the case was. So luckily for us, we're in a good spot. So the first thing is to have a plan. So what do I plan for? Where do I find the information? What I should plan for? How do I start? And how do I prioritize my needs? Well, what I should plan for, at least now, are my immediate needs. My immediate needs and my family's immediate needs. That should focus on my health, like Dr. Bacall said, my physical needs, you know, my physical health, my security needs, and my ability to sustain myself, right? If I can take care of those physiological needs, then I'm pretty well set. I don't have to worry about that piece. Where do I find the information? I mean, it's all COVID all the time. It's pretty easy to figure that piece out. Starting is just the ability to have an approach, right? The idea is we want to be able to start at any given point. And the how do I start piece is to say, okay, great, what do I need to focus on, and then start on that. It's like the elephant, right? If you try to figure out what part of the elephant you're supposed to eat or how much of it at a time, just prioritize what your needs are and then start on that. And I guarantee within a day or two, you'll start to feel better about your situation. Perfect. So based on our situation, we want to take inventory. And again, this is what Jen was talking about as well. What do I have? What do I need? And then what do I need to acquire? We can apply these to skills as well. So as we look at ourselves individually, we say, okay, what skills do I have? What assets do I have? What resources do I have? What do I need? And then what can I acquire? We see in the news a lot of people, first timers buying guns. Probably not the best thing to do, because that skill set is a little bit bigger than Hollywood would lead you to believe. But if that makes you feel better, that's fine. It might take your security needs. And then you look at it from what skills can I offer others, and what skills do I need to be offered to me to make me stronger, whether as an individual, a family, a communal area, or a neighborhood. And then how can I partner to close those skills and resources gaps, right? Maybe I can sew. I can't sew, by the way. I want that regarded. But maybe I can sew, and Jen can. Jen's gardener, and Mark's a ninja sniper, right? And maybe we can figure out how to work all those skills in to provide a better security, you know, not only for us, but for our neighborhood, et cetera. From there, it helps us, all these preparations help develop our foundation. And our foundation helps us, gives us something to fall back on, right? So what all this shit hit the fan people were looking for was like, okay, nuclear holocaust, and I need to move. Well, in this place, we're in a better situation because we're in place. Our infrastructure is sound. Everything's, you know, we've got running water, we've got electricity. So actually most of the work's done for us, right? We're not worried about our base survival needs like I think Jen and Orly were talking about. So we can focus on just, hey, am I okay? Can I get up? Do I have a schedule? Am I healthy? Do I have food? Do I have security, right? Usually 2 weeks to a month is what we're seeing right now. So as long as I have the ability to provide for that, I should be good to go.
Hey,
Again,
Chris,
yes, sir.
Chris, let me interrupt you here for a second. I know that you were part of a very, very elegant panel earlier today on the security of the food chain supply. What can you tell us in a nutshell? What was said there? How is that happen? You know, what's the situation there? Do we have to be concerned because of that?
Well, I think so. In a nutshell, the food folks said not so much from their perspective, right? But a lot of the focus was contamination outside entities. I would say from what we're seeing, this is part of my thought process too, is go out and see what's happening in your neighborhood, because from an industry perspective, that's one thing, but what you're getting on your shelves is a completely another. So what impacts an industry or is important to that industry, that may not be the ground truth from what you're seeing, right? So if, you know, you talked about at the beginning of the show, first it was toilet paper, then it's eggs, and then computer products and hair trimmers. You know, as that trickle down effect starts hitting us in the market, you know, the next might be fresh vegetables. It might be those perishable goods that we're seeing, that because there are no people to pick those, or there are no people to transport them. So we will probably start seeing some of those things, what used to be easily available, shipped away from that right now. And you have to go to frozen for those people who need fresh.
Right. Okay, great points.
Okay, and I know I'm burning through this because I don't want to take up too much of anybody else's time, but once we have a plan in place, we want to review it, rehearse it. You can have a great plan, but the first time you put it into effect isn't when you need it, right? So you want to be able to rehearse and make sure that, hey, does this work for me? Did I prepare too much? Did I plan to take too much with me? Did I plan to leave and traffic is gridlocked? So do I need to stay in place? This will help us fix some of those issues that are identified through action, not through the plan. Because I'll tell you what, everybody's plan sounds like a great idea on paper, right? But when you put it under a little bit of test is when you have to kind of shake it out a little bit, right? And then once you refine the plan to work as a baseline, then add those stresses. Figure out what you need to do if we lose power for 12 hours. Figure out what we need to do if we have no communications and we don't have a way to communicate to people that we're supposed to connect with. What happens if we're displaced from our homes? And then what happens on top of that if we're ill, or if we need to find, you know, something that we can't execute via self-aid or buddy aid, or we don't have a doctor that lives right down the street. So as we start testing our plan, we'll become more confident in our ability to work through those issues, and more confident in our network's ability to help us out. And then we'll become more resilient. And basically going back to that piece or the conference earlier today, was resilience is a part of what we need, both individually and collectively. And then lastly, I talked about this before, is don't focus on the news. Get outside and be aware of what's going on around you. That'll give you confidence in what you have, what you understand, and what you know. All COVID all the time, doom and gloom, is not necessarily helpful. Then you can look at what are the risks for your specific area and what can impact you specifically. And then again, just get out and understand what's going on around you, so you can figure out how to, we talked about this before, you know, those micro shifts that you need to do to work within your plan. And then of course, always ask for help before you need it. Because if you wait until other people are engaged, it might be too late for them to offer you help. So get out in front of it early if you can.
Very good, Chris. Thank you very much. And I'm going to jump right into Martine and ask you very bluntly, how do we stay safe online? We're working from home. Some folks have their corporate laptops at home. Their kids are playing games on them. Our kids are using Zoom and some other programs to do their schooling, and the hackers are having a great time. How can we be safe in today's crazy environment?
Yeah, I think the challenge. Yeah, I think the challenge is we have to understand that the world is changing, and it's not gonna come back to where it was before COVID, right? And basically, this presentation, there's a lot of information there, and most of it we can We can just skim through it. If you want to go into any detail, we can. But it's basically a continuation of what Chris was talking about. It's this is all based on risk and your own risk self-assessment. What do you need to implement for your specific necessities, right? If it's in the physical realm or in cybersecurity or any type of risk assessment, it helps you hone where your efforts should be spent, right? You don't want to spend too much money or too much time or too much resources in something that's not going to help you when you actually need it. If we talk a little bit about cybersecurity and we try to relate all that information from corporate cybersecurity into your home and this new environment where we're all working from home now, we use the same three pillars we used in the corporate world, which are confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And that's basically from the computer world, right? But this applies to everything. So you cannot become a cybersecurity expert overnight, or as Chris said, you can go buy a gun, but you're not going to be proficient unless you're really practicing with it. Same thing with any martial art. You can buy a book, you can watch a video. You need some practice, right? So if you really need to learn something quick, you need to understand what's going to help you the most. You might ask Joe, hey Joe, give me 15 minutes and teach me one technique, self-defense technique. And if that technique is what you need, that's going to be very helpful, right? So it's the same thing here. You have to understand what are your risks related to cybersecurity and your information, your personal information, and where you need to spend that time and that money or that effort to get better there.
Let me ask you something, Martin. Let me jump into this.
Sure.
Like I sent you this earlier today. I did a course not too long ago, an online course, and these were basically the modules. They were talking about the importance of passwords, right? Basically all these 8 things over here. What I think this is something that many of our audience can relate to, because we're all many times using the same passwords. So what can you say in a nutshell of all these 8 fields right here, and how does that apply to the kids, and how does that apply to our working from home? And really, let me ask you before that. Let me ask before this. What is really? Why don't you give us a really like a strategic assessment? What's the situation right now? What's happening? Is it really as bad as we're hearing when it comes to hacking, and who's hacking who, and who are they targeting, and what type of attacks in general terms?
Sure. So the challenge that we have to adapt to this new situation, the attackers are also having the same challenge, right? The difference is they do have a lot of time, a lot of resources, and they adapt very quickly. So we see attacks going on right now related to COVID. There's I don't know if you've seen, like, there's many cyber or websites that have a lot of maps on how many cases of COVID are in every single place in the world, things like that. Exactly. These are examples like that. So that one at the bottom, I don't know if you guys have seen it. This webpage is from the Johns Hopkins Research Center. But if you look at that red square on the top left of the image, it says corona-virus.map/map.com. And that's basically someone who set up a fake site. You're going to the webpage, you're seeing the exact same thing as if you go to Johns Hopkins, but your computer is actually forced to run things that it shouldn't. Like, for example, grab screenshots from your computer, capture your keyboard, things like that. So they might even get you to execute code in your computer, and now that your computer basically belongs to them. So as the slide said, the first thing is educate yourself and your family on how to prevent these type of things. I think this covered that previous slide. Sorry, if you can go back a little bit. It covers 2 or 3 of the modules that you had on that list.
Right.
And most of these attacks, phishing and malware, is basically learn how to use your email and your web browsing in a secure way, in a safe way. You can see.
And let me ask you something. So it really.
Go ahead.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but in layman terms, it really boils down to simple awareness, right? If you we used to have a awareness and education, of course, understanding, you know, what a phishing attack is, why you should not. Let me go back. So we used to have on the physical side of security, one of my mentors in that field, who's Samuel Bashan, if he's listening to us, he came up with something he called the formula of success for security. And it's the 20-20-60 formula that they used back in those days in the Israeli Dignitary Protection Unit. And it basically makes reference to 20% physical security, 20% technology, and then 60% human factor, right? So you can have all the firewalls and all the software that you want and hardware, but if at the end of the day, you don't have the education or the awareness and you're clicking on that email that looks as if it comes from Bank of America, but it's really not from Bank of America, and you click on it, game over. Is that right? So what?
Yeah.
How can we increase the awareness right now quickly for our listeners in terms of not falling into those type of traps?
So you have to be more careful now because we are on a stress situation. We have the whole family in the house. We're using internet more. That doesn't relate to like utilities in general. You have water, gas, all of those. Every single person in the house uses those in the same way. Internet is different. Your kid is using it different than you, or your husband, your wife. Every person has different uses, and every different use has different risks. So this is very, very important, phishing and email and web browsing, because that touches pretty much everyone. When I say educate yourself, it's related to that specific risk for you. You can see on the left screenshot, it's actually a text message on your phone. So you might be very aware of email and browsing, but if you're not paying attention, that same attack can happen through a simple text message on your phone. Someone is telling you, hey, I know you're on quarantine. I'm gonna give you 2 months free of Netflix so you can binge all your shows and just stay in the sofa and you don't have to do anything else. And you click on it and it's actually stealing your Facebook credentials, things like that. And you saw on the right side of the screenshot, there were some statistics on just COVID-related attacks that have been running around on emails and websites and videos that go up in YouTube with information that's actually out there to try to get you to provide them your information.
Sure.
So
listen, we're gonna
go through this. Mm-hmm.
I think Martine, for the sake of time, we're gonna keep this on we're gonna keep this on for a minute for people to watch. And listen, the reality is we could have a separate webinar for each of your topics, right?
Yeah.
Cybersecurity is a big issue. Personal security is a big issue. Medical, mental, and of course HR. These are all plus, of course, like we said before, the financial areas are very big areas of concern. But why don't we thank you, Martine, very much for that for now. And why don't we start taking some questions, guys? I see you have several questions over here. Why don't you guys, who wants to volunteer and take the first question? Just unmute yourself. So we have.
I'll take the question, Joe.
Okay.
So the question was, what are the best tips to maintain a healthy relationship with our spouses? Great question. This is a very trying time for relationships. Stress and anxiety can definitely affect relationships with our romantic partners, husbands, wives, spouses, partners. So I always say, and this is also a great tip for individuals, not just couples, practice gratitude. Start with yourself. First of all, every day or a few days, whatever you decide, try to practice gratitude. Just sit down and take 5 minutes and write down the things you're grateful for. And don't rush into it. Take full 5 minutes and you see what happens to your state of mind, to your perception about life, about what you have, not what you don't have. And with regard to your partners, it's very easy to pick on what they're doing wrong nowadays, because when you're stressed, you see the things they're doing wrong. So I want you to try to catch your partner doing something right every day. just make a comment. Oh, thank you for washing the dishes. I really appreciate that. Thank you for doing that. So practice gratitude with your partner. Also, this is the time to show more fondness and admiration. You know, to find the little things that you appreciate about them, to show more appreciation, more affection, if possible. And you also got to get creative. As I spoke earlier about boundaries, about loss of boundaries, you often look for just some space for yourself, and you may feel suffocated sometimes. So get creative. Let your partner know, you know, I need a few minutes for myself. I'll go to the bedroom. You take care of the kids or take care of the laundry or whatever it is. So be creative about boundaries and about rules around the house. Renegotiate roles. You know, this is the time to renegotiate because you are not in the same role that you usually are. You know, this is the time to delegate roles, not just to your partner, but to your kids. So exactly. So negotiating is very important. Finally, make sure you keep the daily rituals of connections with your partner. So a date night may sound impossible to do nowadays, but just say, let's do a date night. You know, even watching a Netflix show together, it can be considered a date night nowadays. So just make the most out of what you have. And call it a date night, because just by calling it, it changes the way you view things.
Thank you, Orly. Excellent. We have one question for Jen, and I'm going to read it, Jen, while you unmute yourself. They're asking, how do you see the role of HR in the new era? Downsizing, resizing, turnover. Companies will see there are no essential jobs. Companies will have to recover and pay cost. In other words,
Yeah. So, you know, it's going to sound like I'm taking a bit of an easy way out here, but I have to be honest with you. I don't actually see the role of HR any differently than I did before. I have always seen the role of HR as that of business person first, who specializes in how does the employee impact that business model. And so, you know, it's not as though that HR really ever had the luxury of kind of, I know a lot of people, you know, might have thought of HR as like a cost center that we were just always spending budget dollars. But, you know, the re-engineering of organizations has really, I mean, you know, back in the 80s and 90s, they used to call it right sizing, but honestly, it's just, in the time that I've been an HR professional, it's a constant thing. You're always, I mean, you know, year over year, companies are looking to say, is there anything that changed this year with the way we've implemented technology that makes a job redundant? And do we need to make those changes? And so I think just, you know, HR professionals continuing to balance. I like to talk all the time about the balance of, you can never pick being either the company agent or the employee advocate. It is an equal both, right? And you can't split the difference, right? To the point of that book title. I have to think about what is best for the workforce, for the employees. I also have to think about what is best for the longevity and the sustainability of the company. And so I think human resources professionals are really going to have to, you know, work to offer program, you know, pretty much all the things that we said about upskilling, right? Chris was talking about, you know, what skills do I have? What skills do I need? HR asks themselves ask themselves about that all the time. We look at our 3 and 5 year plans for companies and we say, you know, this is where we're going as a company. This is where we want to be 3 years from now. This is where we want to be 5 years from now. What skills do we have on our workforce today? What skills do we need to go get or provide to the employees that we have?
Excellent. We have one
Joe,
question here for.
I could follow up a little bit.
Hold on, Mark. I have one for you. Actually, there's one for you regarding. I wanted to see. Somebody was asking. Randy Stern is asking, how do we adapt to social situations, greeting friends and family, greeting coworkers, hugs, kisses, shaking hands, basically fears of infections and germs?
First, I'm going to follow up on Orly's answer because I agree with everything she said, but I'm going to expand it and say it also applies to your children and your family. So the respect, the boundaries, all those things at home. You're not just stuck with your spouse, but you're stuck with your children, and you really have to give them the attention they need and also give them the space they need. And it's a learning experience right now. I know in the beginning, we probably were too lax in our house, and I mean, my kids are all grown up and they all came home and it was a little bit lax, and we had to tighten up a little, make some rules, but then also give some space. So agree with that and attach it to your families. As far as the adapting to social situations that Randy asked, it's really, I mean, before this ever happened, some people weren't comfortable kissing and hugging and shaking hands and those things. So if you weren't comfortable before, you're definitely not going to be comfortable now. And afterwards, some people who were comfortable may not. So it may come along slowly. Along those lines, when you're afraid of infection, the best way to prevent getting infections, whether it's a common cold or the flu or other things, is washing your hands. And that holds true with this illness and any illness during various seasons. And shaking hands may go by the wayside. Kissing may go by the wayside or may become less popular, but it'll take a while before people become comfortable doing those things again.
Okay, let me jump in. We have two more questions. One for Martine on the cyber realm and one for Chris. I'm going to start, Martine, with you, and there's two questions here. I'm going to blend them into one. Someone is asking a question: can the internet collapse if everyone's hooked at the same time? Which could be a problem. That's question number one. And then question number two, I'm going to read it. It's from Masha. She's asking, what do you think would be a good way to join Zoom on every meeting without being hacked? Normally, you join a meeting without putting your info, but nonetheless, it could be hacked, right? Martine, you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah,
okay, there you go.
Okay, so for the first one, I think the big test for the internet infrastructure was exactly when everyone went work from home. There was a lot of stress on the networks. You could see companies, clients of mine, that they were struggling because they had 10 users connected remotely and then went to the next day 1,000 users connected remotely. So we should have seen those symptoms back then. I think if it was able to withstand that, it will be fine. It might, if you really depend on internet for your business, for your health, for whatever reason, then it would be a good idea to include that in your risk assessment and make sure you have a secondary option, right? It might be use your phone to connect to the internet if your home internet goes down, things like that. Related to the Zoom application, same thing happened to them. They were having millions of meetings a day, and from one day to the next or a week to the next, they went to hundreds of millions of meetings. So their infrastructure was very stressed. There were several security issues that were discussed in the security community worldwide because they didn't have the security in place to withstand this, and many concerning issues were identified. One of them was, for example, that if you had information about a specific meeting, you could enter the meeting, interact with people that were in the meeting, and actually access their LinkedIn and their Facebook through their computer, through a flaw on the Zoom application. So Zoom has been working very, very hard these last couple of weeks on fixing those issues. I would say, again, based on your risk assessment, is this a computer where you have information that you don't want to get out, like you don't want it to get out on the open? If it's your work computer, your company should be taking care of that. This is your personal computer. What do I keep there? Do I keep there my tax returns, my social security numbers, things that I don't want to share? Then I'd rather do Zoom from my phone if that's the case, or from another computer. I have several computers here all over the place. You can't see it because of the background, but I have six, seven computers here. I use 2 or 3 of them for specific purposes because of my specific risk profile. That doesn't mean everyone has to do that, but if you feel your information can be at risk, that could be an option, and there's several options.
But Martin, we also talked offline before about the fact that some people now can do a Zoom channel, right? So I can say, for example, my name is Zoom whatever / Joe 123, and then if I go and I publish that on Facebook and I ask my friends to come and look for me, well, of course, it's like leaving the door of your house open, right? So actually this way right now of doing a webinar where people have to go to a Zoom website, validate their email, and only then get the password, I think is something that the Zoom company did to create more security. But of course, at the end of the day, like you were saying before, I think it's also a matter of awareness, right? You can have all the software and good things on your computer, but if you're clicking on that email or on that WhatsApp message, you're still going to get infected and you're going to be suffering on that. Chris, we have a question here. We actually have 2 questions here for you. Why don't you address one of those?
I'm hoping it's not the one that talks about social interaction. But anyways, I'm going to go with
there was one here with the helping senior leaders focus on the next.
Yeah, so I'm going to address the one from Mark Moore, who talked about discussing ideas for helping senior leaders focus on the next threat rather than past threats. And this is an age-old issue. I mean, our military does the same thing, right? We focus on the last fight we had, not the next one. And we're slowly seeing that start to change. The best advice I can give for that is show how those past threats were addressed, show, continual risk assessments, show continual analysis on how the past are handled and how the future threats or the next threats need to be addressed, and vulnerabilities are past threats, how systems are in place to mitigate and reduce those risks, and what can be done to recover from those, and then show where those gaps are on the front end. It's it's tempting to show folks what's going on now and go, see, look, I told you we should have prepared for a pandemic, but I don't say that that's probably the best of approaches. But again, showing them what you've done from your past issues, and then the weaknesses in the future issues is probably the best way to approach that.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much. And we're going to start wrapping up things over here. Great panels. Thank you for all your input. And we pretty much, I think, can summarize the following, right? We all want to hopefully be part of the solution, understand that this is all in the mindset, right? Having the right mindset, what we called before the warrior mindset or the growth mindset, is something critical in these times. And of course, like we said before, start with yourself. You can't start demanding from others. Start with yourself. Be in control. Have those routines that can give you your zen, can have you control whatever you can control. We talked about not being able to control everything, but some things we can control. So let's try to control that. Use breathing, and then spread positivity, leadership, courage, togetherness. We talked about focusing on the micro tasks. We talked about communicating a lot and really shutting off fear and anything or anyone that promotes this, right? We talked about leading by example and helping those around you. And in general terms, we talked about making our communities safer. At this point, I want to ask the panelists if you have any other gems that you want to share. And I also want to suggest that maybe each of you can send me 2, 3, 4 points or links that you want to share with all the audience, and I can then go ahead and share some links or maybe some books or whatever you guys want to recommend I think that would be appreciated by all. So anything else from you guys at this point?
I would just say from a career growth perspective, you know, it's the employees that do have that growth mindset, that warrior mindset, that honestly, no matter what the skill set, you know, great companies are always looking for positive people with drive and people who are willing to learn something new. And so, you know, just work on being the kind of person who tackles opportunities and looks to always learn and grow. And you know, even if you find yourself unemployed right now, the next opportunity will be there for you.
Excellent. Thank you, Jen.
And Joe, I'm gonna just remind everybody to continue to socially embrace while you physically distance.
Fantastic. Good stuff, guys.
I love
Thank
that.
you all very much. Stay safe, go and do something good, and relax. This too shall pass. And I think we're sooner than later, hopefully, okay? Stay healthy.
Thank you so much.
Well.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
You all. Bye.